50 running backs will score fantasy points this weekend, but 25 of them stand out above the rest. Let's discuss the top 25 running backs you need to be starting this week. And tier 1 is very simple. We don't have to spend much time here. Austin Eckler is the #1 running back, followed by Derrick Henry. Henry, who has 25 plus touches in 5 straight games, and Austin Eckler, who's on pace to set the NFL record with 117 RB receptions. Things start to actually get interesting in tier 2 right here. And we can start by looking at the top of tier 2, where Josh Jacobs is my running back 3 this week. We saw some very interesting usage in week 8 out of Jacobs. He was seeing all the passing game work, but this past week only 17 routes run compared to 14 for the backup Amir Abdullah. And this led to Josh Jacobs having his worst fantasy day of the week. Abdullah actually had 5 targets. And it's strange because if we look at Josh Jacobs' snaps the entire season, you're getting 60 to 70 to then these last couple of weeks, he was a workhorse back playing 80% of the snaps until this past week they took him off the field, which they haven't done this year in passing situations while trailing only 54% of the snaps. So let's hope this trend doesn't continue, but the good news is in this matchup this week, he shouldn't have to worry about it. The Raiders are going to take on the Jaguars, who rank 32nd in tackling, and this is big because Josh Jacobs is the second best running back at breaking tackles in the NFL. Because of this, I like Josh Jacobs over 77.5 rushing yards this week in his player prop. You get a free bet up to $100 if you want to use the link in the description below and tail this bet. Now, my running back 4 this week is going to be Aaron Jones, who's going to get a matchup against the Lions' number 27 run defense. And Jones has been elite this year. He's the 6th best running back in yards per touch. He's very productive, and he's creating nearly 4 yards per touch every time he touches the ball on his own, meaning independent of his offensive line. That is how good he is. Elusiveness, breaking tackles, ending up finding the hole. He's great. So expect 15 plus touches and all the red zone usage for him. And then there's Alvin Kamara, who's my running back 5 this week. And Kamara with Andy Dalton has been fantastic. Take a look for yourself. In 4 games with Andy Dalton this year, he's averaging 26 fantasy points and nearly 9 targets per game, adding up to 145 total yards per game. Long story short, that's fantastic, and it makes him a top 5 running back. And my running back 6 is second-year player Travis Etienne, who might as well be a rookie since he didn't play in his first year, and he has been absolutely fantastic. He's actually going to get a matchup against the team Alvin Kamara played just a week ago, and Kamara put up 40 plus fantasy points. Now, Etienne as a starter this year, since he's taken the role from James Robinson and then Robinson not being there last week, is averaging 20 fantasy points per game and over 20 touches per game. And he very quietly has 100 plus total yards in 4 straight games and faces the Raiders, who give up the 3rd most catches to the running back position. So we like Etienne, and we also like Dalvin Cook, my running back 7 this week. Check this out. To begin the season, Dalvin Cook was playing between 60 and 70% of the snaps, but then some things dropped off. He only played 57% of the snaps, and we started to get worried as Alexander Mattison was seeing more usage. But all those concerns have been put to rest the last 2 games when he's played 86 and 78% of the snaps and has now been a top 12 running back in 3 straight games. So Cook is a top 10 running back, and so is this next guy. And that is Joe Mixon, the running back 8 this week. He's been a frustrating player to own, but look, he continues to produce. 12 plus fantasy points in 5 straight games is solid. And he still has the ultimate cheat codes at the running back position for fantasy. Your red zone touches and your targets for a running back are the cheat codes, and he has them. He's top 5 in both areas, seeing a ton of red zone touches per game, 6 per game. And now he faces the Panthers, who actually have a solid run defense, but the Bengals are 7-point favorites. Expect a lot of touches in this one for Mixon. Now let's talk about the last player in tier 2 this week, my running back 9, Kenneth Walker. And his usage this past week was encouraging. Travis Homer returned, who's a 3rd down back. They like him in the passing game, but Kenneth Walker still played a ton of snaps, majority of the snaps. And check this out. He ran more than double the amount of routes as Travis Homer. So he was staying on the field in a lot of 3rd down and shorts. He ran 23 routes compared to just 10 for Homer. And the reason why this is exciting is the more you're on the field in those passing situations, the higher chance you have for targets. Now, as a starter in 3 games, he averages 20 fantasy points per contest, over 21 touches per game, and to this point, 110 yards per game. He is fantastic, a top 10 running back. And now he faces the number 27 run defense in the Arizona Cardinals. They're tied for 27th with the Lions. We call them 27, we call them 28. Either way, a bottom 5 run defense. Now, rounding out the top 10 is going to be a running back out of New England in Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson quietly has the cheat codes as well, being top 10 in targets and red zone touches at the running back position. And the crazy part, he's only been a clear starter for half of the weeks. He's been splitting snaps for the other half with Damian Harris. And speaking of Damian Harris, he returned last week and actually started. And this is the main reason why Stevenson isn't higher in my ranks. Now, although Harris started, it was Stevenson who ended up playing more snaps, 18 total snaps. In this one, he played on the 3rd downs, and he actually closed the game out, which showed their confidence in him. And he was way better than Harris. He looks better. He's way more versatile with the passing game upside. Now, expect more Damian Harris this week because the Patriots are 5.5-point favorites, meaning Stevenson probably not going to be needed in the 2-minute drill to force a comeback late in the game. But Ramondre very quietly averaging over 115 yards per game, including 4 games with Harris out there. Now, my running back 11 this week, who's in tier 3, is going to be Leonard Fournette, who finds himself in a very tough matchup against the Rams, who rank number 2 this week in run defense. Now, the positive news was for Fournette, he saw his usage increase. He saw just 59% of the snaps last week. Well, in week 8, he ends up seeing 75% of the snaps, pushing aside the rookie just a little bit in Rachaad White. Fournette actually ran 29 routes in this game to just 7 for Rachaad White. So that's nice passing game usage and secure usage with Tom Brady. Now, the only reason why he's not inside the top 10 is the tough matchup, and the Bucks only have a 22.5 point team total. Not great. And now to the running back 12, Jonathan Taylor, who actually won this week without even playing. Nyheim Hines is gone, and to Buffalo. And Hines is arguably a top 5 pass catching running back in the NFL, so this lends itself nicely for more targets and passing game usage for JT. Now, the problem for JT this year is through 6 games, he has just 1 touchdown. The offense isn't getting to the red zone all that much. The offensive line is not great. And now it's Sam Ehlinger, a mobile quarterback back there. Yeah, it takes away his upside. And now this is the reason why Jonathan Taylor is a low-end running back 1, high-end running back 2 in fantasy football. He's no longer the elite player. I've actually taken him under 76.5 rushing yards this week. I only have him in the mid-50s. Not the greatest offense with Sam Ehlinger. Again, you can take that with a free bet with the link in the description below on prizepicks.com. So now we go to tier 4. The first guy in this, my running back 13, and that is going to be DeAndre Swift, who, look, we discussed earlier in the week, he's a trade-away player. Swift returned last week. He saw his normal role. He played the most snaps, 33 compared to 22 for Jamal Williams, but he was outtouched 13-10 by Williams, and Williams saw all of the goal line usage. Now, obviously, this isn't fantastic, but Swift has been extremely efficient, but it's somewhat skewed. You see, Swift is averaging the most yards per touch in the NFL at 7.6, but a lot of this is because of his small sample. He had a great week 1, but since then, in 3 games, he only has 17 carries total, not in each game, total. So he's basically in a split backfield and not the greatest offense, and he's not even getting the red zone or touchdown upside. That's Jamal Williams. And hey, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to hit the subscribe button for more. Now, my running back 14 this week does have some upside, especially for this week, and that's Raheem Mostert. Jeff Wilson is now in Miami, reunited with Raheem Mostert, his former teammate. But for this week, Wilson probably not going to be all the way caught up to speed on the playbook. Now, it is a similar offensive scheme since it's coming basically from San Francisco with their head coach Mike McDaniel, so maybe he is going to be caught up to speed, so track some reports on that. Either way, though, I believe Raheem Mostert will continue to be the running back 1 here, continue to play over 60% of the snaps, and he has an elite matchup versus the number 31 Chicago Bears run defense. Reminder, this is the same run defense that gave up over 30 fantasy points on just 15 touches to Tony Pollard a week ago. So start Mostert everywhere, and also start this next veteran. And that would be my running back 15, Devin Singletary, who, like Mostert, has a new running back in his backfield, Nyheim Hines, who is a threat to Singletary, but more so moving forward and not this week. You see, Hines is going to need some time to learn the playbook, but in future weeks, he's going to steal those cheat codes, the targets from Devin Singletary. Because very quietly, Devin Singletary ranks 5th in the NFL in routes run amongst running backs this year, and this is including the fact that he's been on a bye week and a lot of other players, a lot of other running backs haven't. Now, this has led to about 4.4 targets per game, but it's also allowed him to see big games when the Bills are trailing, like against Miami earlier in the year when he was the running back 4 on the week catching 9 balls. So expect Singletary to be phased out in future weeks. This might be your last time to start him as a solid running back 2. And now we get to my tier 5, and it's going to be the first running back in this, my running back 16, James Conner, or Eno Benjamin, whoever is going to start here. Now, I selfishly want it to be Eno Benjamin so we know what to expect. It'll basically be what we've seen the last couple of weeks. And that is Eno Benjamin operating as a starter, because even last week with the veteran Darrell Williams back, Eno Benjamin still saw 74% of the snaps. That's borderline top 5 running back usage. And now so far through 3 games as a starter, he's averaging 14.1 fantasy points per game. That is solid. He's averaging over 17 opportunities per game and about 74 yards per contest. And he now faces the Seattle Seahawks, who give up the 5th most fantasy points to the running back position. So if there's no Conner, go Eno. If Conner is back, they're going to need him because they haven't been all that efficient on the ground, especially in the red zone. Now we hop on over to my running back 16, and it's David Montgomery, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not all that excited to play him because he's still seeing the starter snaps, but since the Bears went to the hot hand approach 2 weeks ago, he's being significantly outproduced by Khalil Herbert. You see, Herbert's a top 12 running back the last 2 weeks, but Montgomery isn't even in the top 25. But it's difficult not to play Montgomery because on the season, he's averaging over 13 carries per game, about 2 targets per game, so that's solid usage, and it's continuing these last couple of weeks, seeing 15 touches a game. And the last 2 games alone, he's seen 7 red zone touches. Now, the downside is Justin Fields is also seeing a lot of usage there, and they play the number 4 run defense in the Dolphins this week. So temper your expectations on Montgomery, but because of all the bye weeks, he is firmly in play. And now to my running back 18, Michael Carter, who is a solid start and the Jets RB1. Now, this week, the Jets are 12.5 point underdogs, which means you're going to have to see a lot more passing usage for Michael Carter, which is what we want as fantasy owners. You see, last week alone, Michael Carter saw decent usage, only 10 fantasy points, but 7 targets in that game is encouraging, the most he's seen with Zach Wilson this season. Now, you can expect James Robinson, who made his debut last week, to see more touches. This is the big thing we must see. Ty Johnson, who saw 18 snaps last week, he has to get less usage so we can lock in this strong passing game work for Michael Carter. And now, if Ty Johnson is phased out of the offense this week, there's a real chance you could see a 10-target game for Michael Carter as the Jets play catch-up in this game. So now we get to my running back 19, and it takes us to Carolina. And I'm talking about Deonta Foreman, who dominated week 8 with 3 touchdowns, a massive game, but this week, Chuba Hubbard is returning. Even though Hubbard is back, you can expect Foreman, based on his performances the last 2 weeks, to probably see about 60% of the rushing down snaps and the red zone usage. And he has a good matchup against the Bengals, who ranked 25th in run defense and just got gashed by the Cleveland Browns, over 150 yards, multiple touchdowns to Nick Chubb alone last week. Now, the one issue is that the Panthers are 7.5-point underdogs, meaning they'll likely be trailing in this game, and if that's the case, Chuba Hubbard is going to come on the field more, but that's the reason why Foreman isn't in the top 15 or top 10. He's the running back 19 this week. And as we head over to tier 6, the man atop of it is Jamal Williams, my number 20 RB this week. And don't look now, but Jamal Williams is a top 15 running back this week, and now he has a revenge game against his former team, the Green Bay Packers. And this Packers team ranks 28th in tackling, as you can see right here, and bottom 10 in the NFL in run defense. And even with DeAndre Swift back, Jamal Williams still saw more touches, 13 compared to just 10 for Swift last week, and he's getting all the goal line usage. Very quietly this season, Jamal Williams ranks top 5 in the NFL with 21 red zone touches and top 2 with 10 goal line carries. He has all the upside because of these touchdowns. So Williams is a solid flex play, and so is my running back 21. And that would be Antonio Gibson, who's not the greatest option, but due to the bye weeks, we're forced to kind of have to play him. Ideally, you have a better option here, but it's hard to ignore how good he's been when trailing this season. Look at this. So last week, he only ends up seeing 22 snaps. 3 running backs in this game split the work. It's a complete and utter disaster for fantasy. But almost surprisingly, they're going to Antonio Gibson a lot more than usual compared to JD McKissic in clear and obvious passing downs. That's why he had a bunch of receptions a week ago. And as a running back, you'll see more targets and receptions when you're trailing in games, and in 2 games as an underdog this year, he's seen 13.9 fantasy points per game. So Herbert's a solid option. Now let's talk about my RB22. And that would be Khalil Herbert, who is slowly breaking out. Again, these last 2 weeks, he's played less snaps than David Montgomery, but far outproduced him. You see, he's been a top 10 running back in rushing yards the last 2 weeks, and he's 12th overall in fantasy points, averaging over 15 points per game in weeks 7 and 8. And very quietly, he is a top 5 running back in the NFL in yards per touch. 6.5 yards per touch is elite. I mean, he's averaging 93 yards and a touchdown since they've given him more chances these last 2 games. Now, the only reason why he's not higher is he only played 25% of the snaps last week. He was getting a lot of touches, yes, put up 99 yards and a touchdown, but we need to see more snaps before we can start ranking him in the top 15. Next up is my running back 23, and it's going to be Darrell Henderson. Now, again, this is just another one of those guys that I don't really want to play. Hopefully, maybe you have a better wide receiver, but because of the buys, he has to be in play. But he was in a 3-headed backfield last week. He led that 3-headed backfield in terms of snaps, but he was actually out-touched 12-6 by Ronnie Rivers. And Malcolm Brown was seeing all of the red zone and goal line usage. So Henderson was basically like a glorified pass-catching running back. And now Kyron Williams and Cam Akers might be returning this week for the Rams, making this a very messy backfield. Yes, I think Henderson is still the RB1A, if you will, but hopefully you have another option. And maybe you'll prefer my RB24 instead, and that's going to be the rookie Tyler Algier, who has had a fun rookie season. You see, this past week alone, he actually saw 60% of the snaps, and it resulted in him seeing 17.5 fantasy points, 7 touches. This is really good. So why such a low rank, especially below Henderson? Well, Cordell Patterson is expected to return and come off the IR this week, so that's going to bump down the rookie, of course. And either way, 3 running backs are still involved in this offense. I mean, last week alone, Caleb Huntley even saw 16 touches. So even though he had a good week, temper the expectations moving forward, especially because he's not that productive. Like, if he's not scoring touchdowns, he's only averaging 4.4 yards per touch, 43rd amongst all running backs in the NFL, and he only has 5 targets on the entire season. So no passing game usage. He's touchdown dependent, but now Patterson is returning. And now number 25 is very interesting. He'll probably solve a lot of start-sit questions for you. And the fantasy cheat sheet will also solve those questions, ranking out over 70 running backs, over 100 wide receivers, and all other positions with much more tools, a 5-step system to help you win more in fantasy. You can click the link in the description below to gain access, and if you don't win your fantasy league, I will refund the one-time payment. That's all it is, one-time payment of $10. I'll refund that completely. This is risk-free. So to join the thousands of other people using the fantasy cheat sheet and all the tools that are emailed to you daily throughout the week, well, click the link in the description to get access. And rounding out the top rankings this week is Gus Edwards, who is an interesting player because the last time we saw him, he was dealing with injury. He was out-touched on Thursday Night Football, so he had the mini-bye, if you will, and he was out-touched by Kenyon Drake, who saw 44 snaps to Edwards, just 16. But Edwards was coming off of injury. It was a short week, and then he got hurt in this game, so this is heavily skewed. And even in this game, he saw 11 touches for 65 yards, averaging nearly 6 yards per carry, and he looked pretty dynamic on them. Now he's had 10 days to recover, and he seems to be healthy. The matchup will not be an easy one, as the New Orleans Saints ranked top 10 in run defense and just gave Josh Jacobs, who's been great this season, his worst game of the year, although that's more so his overall offense not being able to put up a single point. But with the teams on bye and the expectation of 15 touches for Edwards and some red zone work, it makes him a strong flex or RB2. Now, these are just the running backs you want to be starting this week. The fantasy cheat sheet will have every other position and more, including the rest of season rankings, which can be used to find the perfect players to be trading for. And this video right here will also help identify some of those players.